let me just give a few introductory things about the things I've personally been involved with, just to set the scene. Then I'm going to go through what I understand by training, what training involves. We'll see where we go from there. And then I may, if it's time at the end, look at the example of Elijah and Elisha. I won't start there simply because I want to set the general scene first. But if there's time, we'll get to that. If not, we won't, but don't worry about it, okay? So all I'm saying is we'll be biblical even if I'm not starting with that, okay? So what's my personal experience? Why am I able to speak to you about it? First reason is that when I started my ministry, I had somebody really inputting me and dealing with all the obstacles in me for church leadership. Okay? You need to know yourself. If you don't know yourself and your weaknesses, you will pass on your weaknesses to other people. Okay? You get that? And because of my, and all of us have a background before we come into leadership. And that background affects us in different ways. It affects us positively. Okay, so for me, my background was in first international trade negotiations and then in international banking. Okay, so that was my background in work. All that gave me a love for other cultures and a respect for the perspective of people from other cultures. Okay, I served in various capacities. I served on the first UN Working Party on the debt problems of the developing world. I served on that for 2 or 3 years. I was involved in lots of other things like that. And then in international banking, one particular group of Pacific islands, I lent them their first loan that government had ever had. Okay? And so it just gave me an appreciation of culture. And so there are some things in which your background is God's preparation for your future ministry. There's other things that your background, if not dealt with, will hinder your future ministry. Okay? So both Scylla and I, my wife and I, were brought up in an extreme religious sect called the Exclusive Plymouth Brethren, where we were now allowed no contact with the world. I had no radio, no TV, no recorded music. I wasn't allowed to have a meal even with somebody who wasn't part of our church. We had to be kept absolutely separate from the world. And in my home, my mother was part of it, obviously, with my father, but she always hated being part of it, and therefore would be arguing with my dad over whether we continue in it, all the new rules, because the way that group kept your motivation was to bring out new rules every few months so that you could have something to talk about, and to kick people out who didn't conform to the new rules. Okay? And so there was a lot of religious conflict at home. Not other things, there wasn't conflict over other family matters, but over religious things, there was conflict. Also, I was all the time in that group, you were trying to find each other out as to whether you were conforming and all that sort of stuff. Okay? For my wife, she was, when she was 19 years old, we were engaged. I left that group, so our engagement was forcibly broken off by her parents. She stayed in for a while. We met each other secretly. Then when it was found out we were meeting each other secretly, she got church disciplined and so on until she left. She left at the age of 19 because we were engaged very young. Next week is our 55th wedding anniversary. So, I hope you don't mind all this. But it's important because you carry into your leadership things that have formed you as a person. Okay, so it was, when she left at the age of 19, and she left not for me, she left because she could see what was going on was wrong. She knew, having taken that step, she would be cut, unless God worked miraculously, she would be cut off from her family for the rest of her life, which is what has happened. Okay. Right, now, so what that did to me, I found it almost impossible to confront in leadership because I'd been brought up in a load of religious arguments. So I never wanted to get into that. I was unable to face difficult issues with people. So when it came into church leadership, that became a major disqualification. And I remember I also, because of the arguments in the home, felt not only should I not argue, but I need to be in control of everything that happens so that it doesn't get painful. Okay? Hope you don't mind me being honest. So, and then a brother, a man called Philip Vogel, and you won't have heard of him, I don't think. Somehow we got together. He was an older brother. He previously discipled another young man a few years before. His name was Terry Virgo. And so I didn't know that. I didn't know Terry at the time. But I knew this guy who had discipled, well, I found out later, had discipled us both. And so he had to work all through that with me. And I remember, being on his office floor, releasing control of all these things. And it was hard. I was banging on the floor, God, can I really trust you for everything? And so, to be able to train others, you've got to get these things dealt with in yourself. Okay? First. Or if they don't, you will disciple people into your own weaknesses. And if you're a controlling personality, you'll disciple them into being controlling personalities. If you're a fearful personality, you'll disciple them into being fearful. I'm not now talking about doctrinal issues. I'm talking about the inner issues. Because training leaders, a lot of it is about the inner issues that need dealing with. Okay? So, and that really helped me. It didn't mean I got, I'm still learning. By the way, it doesn't matter how old you are, don't never stop learning. And don't think you can't learn from people that you're training. Because I do, And so I then, God put something else into my heart, into my life. Again, I was a banker earning very, very good money, traveling first class all over the world, and was also leading the church. And I found it was quite difficult after a while, leading a church when you're abroad on business 90 days a year, and when all your overseas trips are at less than 48 hours notice. That's how it was for me, because if a deal came up, I had to go. So, leading a church, which we'd planted, and doing that It's quite hard until we know what is God calling us to. And you have to, again, make important leadership decisions. Is God calling us to be a Christian in senior banking, and that needs it? Or is God calling us to lead a church and not do that? Because I couldn't do both anymore. We came to the end of it. So in the end, Scylla and I spent a year praying that through. And in the end felt, no, God's calling us now to just serve the church. I wasn't called to ministry. I was called to serve a small group of people. And that's an important distinction. People often say, well, yeah, I'm called to ministry, as if that's different. I mean, the word ministry just means serving, but actually it's become meaning, it's developed another meaning that I'm in full-time Christian work and all that sort of stuff. No. I was called to serve this small group of people. It was only a small church, about 80 people. But I was called to serve them. We realized that. We shared it with the other leaders. They say, we agree. But actually, at that time, our church was building a church building and had run out of money. The shell was there and nothing else. Had no money to finish it. And so they said, yes, we believe you should be in full-time ministry, but only when all the money's come in for the building so we can finish it. But at that time, I thought, well, we can't do both anymore. And the very, very first, it wasn't called New Frontiers then, but conference I attended, there was a prophetic word, and I felt God was saying to me, just give up the job anyway and live by faith. Okay? Because these steps, they form something in you. All the way home, I prayed, Lord, if this is of you, let Scylla have heard the same. Because it's a bit of a, when you're on a good salary and you got a loan to pay on your house and you got everything, And when I got home, she said, what have you got to tell me? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I was doing a Bible study this morning and I read 1 Peter. She was studying 1 Peter with another lady in the church where it says, Sarah obeyed her husband and didn't give way to fear. She said, and you're going to tell me something and I'm not going to give way to fear. So I said, yeah, God's called me to give up the job anyway. And we had no idea when money would come in for the building. And so that's what happened. We lived miraculously and people said to me, if you do this, some people would divert their giving to you and the building would never be finished. What happened was, as soon as I did it, all the money came in for the building. So we just had to live that way for just over a year. Okay, but God forms things in you. So it forms faith. It forms obedience. Do you understand? All these early things. So you help people who you're discipling with those things. What is it that God's working in you? Okay, so after that, first I was just discipling young guys in the church, people in their late teens. One who came on to have a very significant ministry. Some of you will know him, a guy called David Stroud. Leads a big church in London. And he said, will I disciple him when he was about 18? I said, yes. I take the dog for a walk at 6 o'clock every morning. Join me and we'll do that together. Okay, because you need, when you're discipling people, don't make it too easy. Okay? Do you really want to learn? So 6 o'clock each morning, he would come and join me and we'd talk. He'd often spend the whole day with me if it was stuff that was inappropriate for him to be in. Had breakfast with our family. And in our early days, most of my training was in our home. We followed an open home policy. There's lots of people who are now leading churches in different parts of the world who lived in our home for a few months or a year or two. Because when Jesus trained his disciples, he called them to be with him. Relationship. Okay? So, started doing that. Then, after a while, started church planting from our church. We launched a ministry to try and plant 50 churches across the centre of England. And God spoke to me about that. And just called people to come for training. And what I found there was training. So we did training courses in church planting. But training is not enough. Whenever you're training people, once they start doing their ministry, coaching is equally important. Because when you're being trained, you haven't encountered the problems that you're going to encounter in ministry. You know, and it can be head knowledge. When you're actually doing the job, then that's when you encounter the issues. And so I always teach coaching is as important as training. And so as we sent people out to plant churches, I used to preach in my home church in the morning, then in the evening I would go up to where the different ones were, gather them together in groups, lay the foundations of their churches, and did that for them together. Sorry, I'm rushing ahead of myself. But I then, when they'd gone, I used to bring them back to our place once a month for coaching together, not one-on-one. And in fact, I've always followed this, that most of our training of leaders is not done one-on-one. Jesus didn't do much one-on-one training. He trained the group of disciples. Is that right? Corporate. When Peter said, "How many times must I forgive my brother?" That was not an academic theological question. Someone had really got to him. You understand? Because the issues arise when you're together. You know, the disciples, that happened several times, didn't it? They were arguing who's the greatest. Do you think the people you're training are any different from the disciples? They'll be wondering, well, who's got David's most attention? Who's going to really... No, we said, no, we deal with that together. So coaching I did together. So I'll bring them all back together and I'll say, well, okay, they will send me beforehand, these are the issues they're facing in their church plant that they want advice on. What that meant was the other planting churches also learned from the things that they hadn't yet faced, but would. Okay, yeah? Yes. We don't get exclusive about our training anyway. The people we are training need other people to train them as well. It's not all about us. I encourage people I'm training to learn from others as well. Similarly on the coaching. But I would also, if I'm sending people to plant churches, I know I've got a responsibility to make sure they're coached as well. Whether I do it all is not the point. Does that answer? Good. Okay. Then started doing much more internationally. And so Started working primarily in Russia, Ukraine, the Russian-speaking world, and in the Middle East, Muslim world, from North Africa to Pakistan. And again, I learned there cross-cultural training. Okay? To do that, you have to really get into the culture. So, probably the most fruitful, only eternity will not show, but probably the most fruitful thing we've ever done was what we did in Russia. Okay, so we would live there for 3 months each year. Basically, they said to me, the people that were just joining the New Frontiers family, a few Russian churches, and they said, we believe what you're teaching, but we don't know how to do it. Because things like team leadership are not characteristic of the Russian culture. Okay, it's all top down. So they said, you'll have to show us. And this is the important thing in training. You have to show, not just tell. Okay, that's why you can't get it all from a book. So we said, okay, well, come and live here 3 months each year, and learned and appreciated their culture. And I was trying to train to say, these are the things we believe in, this is team leadership, but how does that work out in a Russian context? I don't take Western models of team. I say, how does leadership in that way work out in your cultural context? And we must learn how to do that. Training cross-culturally means that you're learning as much as you're teaching, because you're learning about the culture. You don't come with all the answers. And one of the things I learned was that it's no good just giving answers. In fact, I used to annoy them quite often. They'd say, David, what do you think we should do about this? And I would never answer that question. I would say, these are the biblical principles. How does that work out where you are? They said, David, just tell us. No. If I just told them, I would be modeling their cultural way of doing it, of top down, and not encouraging them to learn together. Do you understand me? So I would say, no, these are the principles, and we lived it. We had all the leaders into our home. We lived as they lived. In those days, they're quite wealthy now in middle-class Russia, but at that time, post-Soviet, it was quite poor. And so we rented a flat just like them. We had no bed in our flat. We just had a settee which you could open out. Learned to shop in the market, learned to get used to people walking up to us in the market and say, "Inostranets," which means foreigner. So we were on the 10th floor. Most of the time the lift didn't work. You had to carry all your water up. In those days, it's not like that now. But it just makes you appreciate, you live amongst people. The church there that we worked with now has a network of churches, of about 120 churches planted. And they've lost count of the number of gypsy house churches using disciple-making movements. They've lost count of the number of gypsy house churches they've got in villages. Because, you understand, they've done that, not me, but I laid the foundation. And I've done a lot of teaching on apostolic foundations. It's in my book, Fathering Leaders, Motivating Mission. And one of the guys leading that network now has done his master's in apostolic foundations at the Moscow Seminary. So, because they got hold of it. It's quite frightening, I used to find. I said, these guys do what you teach. It's quite an unusual experience. Okay. I remember saying to them, look, you need to have some more next generation leaders in your eldership group. Went back a year later, and they had 3 of them. I thought, what? One of them is now leading the church. He was someone that still used to help in the Christian school there, and she used to teach him when he was 10 years old. He's now leading the church. Okay? So, do you get it? I hope you're learning from this. All right? But you model, you respect the culture, you learn from the culture, as well as teaching into the culture. That's cross-cultural training. Someone asked that at the beginning, didn't they? It's one of their expectations. I hope that's a bit of a help. Yeah?
I don't think you may come on to it, but where we are based in the UK, Birmingham area.
Yeah.
There is indigenous, but there is a lot of cultures as well.
Yes.
So it's not like there's one prevailing culture necessarily.
No.
And that's been a challenge I'm trying to work out how to raise up these from different cultures within an umbrella culture, but respecting and honouring the culture. And it's that difference, I guess, the challenge is culture versus character.
Yeah.
Kind of how you do that well.
Whew. Yes, I mean, we're the same where I am. Our eldership team is 3 white British, 2 Indians, 1 African. That's our eldership team. So, and you mustn't allow the dominant culture to always set the agenda. Okay? But you must also encourage those from other cultures to also develop cross-cultural skills. Okay, so you're all having to learn cross-culturally. Okay, so it's both ways. And talk about the things when they cause difficulties, which they will. Okay? Talk it through. What is the biblical way? Where is this Bible, and where is it culture? And I mean, our Ghanaian elder, for example, he said, well, all his staff, he's got a very high position in the company, all his staff are white British. So he said, I have to learn cross-cultural skills in how to manage. That's put him in very good stead for being an elder in our church. So he's recognizing that. Okay, does that help? Okay, right. Then my next phase of training was coaching apostolic teams and raising up apostolic leaders. So before Terry decentralized into different spheres, he and I ran training for about 4 years for those who were going to release, and went through all the stuff that eventually came out in my book, Fathering Leaders, was taught through that. So you develop them into it, then again, coaching. So with the Russian team, for example, they get on and do it, they're brilliant. But difficult issues, they'll come for me for coaching. So I can't go there at the moment because Brits aren't allowed. South Africans, they can go in there because of your government's position. But for me, Brits, we can't, so we have to meet in Georgia, which is a neutral country, and we have our meetings there. But when I used to go, I would say, okay, we'd have an apostolic team meeting. I wouldn't do teaching. I'd just say, okay, go round the room. What are the issues you're facing? Then, having got all that, I would then talk into each of those issues. So when you're coaching, the agenda is set by those who are there in the team, not by you. When you're training, you're setting more of the agenda. These are the things we've got to get through. By the way, training, coaching, distinction doesn't work in every language, as I've found. But is everyone understanding what I'm meaning there? Okay, even if it doesn't quite work in your own mother tongue, the distinction between helping people to get somewhere and then serving them and helping them with wisdom when they've got there. That's coaching. Okay, so I will, just one moment, I will sit with them. These are all the issues, and then I'll take them one by one and we talk it through. Yeah.
Backing up to training a little bit, how much have you held people accountable? Like I did some training with some guys last year in America that just kind of, they missed several times, and I really felt like saying, look, I asked you to commit, you didn't, you need to step away, but I didn't do that. Should I do that type of deal?
I think I would talk with the people individually to find out why they didn't come. If it's a good reason, be gracious. If it's not, say, look, are you really interested in doing this? Because, yeah, it does get frustrating. And and often in the West, like Britain and America and many other countries, there's a consumer mentality, so they come for what they want, not for what they need.
I just had a suggestion.
I enjoy questions. It gets the best out of me. I will if I'm not getting through the stuff. So, okay, let's stop for the next quarter of an hour. I'll talk. Okay? And then we'll see. Okay? So, for the next quarter of an hour, I haven't a clue what time it is. I'm not looking. Pardon? Oh, thank you. We've got a while yet then. So, if you're bursting with a question in the next 10 to 15 minutes, hold it and then ask, okay? Right. Okay, so now I coach apostolic teams. That's largely the sort of thing I've done, and so on. Okay. So I now want to, having shared lots of principles through my own story, which is a good thing to do, I'm now going to be a bit more systematic and give you some headings, because if you've looked, those with a more oral culture have already learned everything because I've told stories. Those who need a more points type, learn through points, here's some points, okay? I often disappoint people when I'm just telling stories, whereas the people who are oral learners, they've got it all. And by the way, a majority of the world are oral learners. So learn through stories. Okay, that's just by the way. So, what do I mean by training? How I define it is you are developing people in three things: knowledge or doctrine, character, and skills. Training involves all three. Often in the West, training has been only the first one, making sure everyone's got a good systematic theology. But having a good systematic theology does not qualify you for leadership. But not having a good theology can still disqualify you from leadership. Okay? So knowledge, character, which we'll spend quite some time on, because you are developing people's character, which I'll describe what it is, and thirdly, skills, how to do things, how to lead a meeting, how to function in an eldership team, how to do pastoral care, how to take a funeral, which is a very cultural thing, so don't ever do that one cross-culturally. Okay? Marriages are as well. I've had to do a few marriages. I had to do one marriage in Russia and one marriage in Ukraine, because the one in Ukraine is the guy who's now the apostolic leader there, and when he got married, they thought I should do it. But it's such a cross-cultural experience. You have, oh, I hope I get it all right. But, so knowledge, character, developing them in terms of their godly living, their godly attitudes, and skills, how to do the various things that they need to do. Okay. And that's what you're wanting to develop. The first one, the knowledge, can be more easily taught objectively. The second two, character and skills, you have to be doing in order to learn. Okay? So, how I'd put it like this: doctrine needs to be assimilated, skills need to be learned, character needs to be shaped when you're developing leaders. Okay? Doctrine needs to be assimilated, skills need to be learned, character needs to be shaped. Okay? Is that all right? He's writing it down. Okay, that's good. And you can just look at his notes. You're an oral learner, so you don't need to write anything down. Yeah, you can tell the oral learners and the literate learners in your congregation. The oral learners remember all the stories you told. Don't bother to write anything down. The literary learners keep taking notes and think you're going too fast. Okay. So, knowledge doesn't simply mean accumulation of facts or doctrine, but is understanding and your training and ability to think biblically for themselves. You're not there just to give them, this is what you believe. Yes, you teach the Word of God, but you want to enable them to think it through, to think biblically for themselves, so that they can unpack the Scriptures as well. Please come again. Well, knowledge is not simply accumulation of facts or doctrines, but how to think biblically for yourself. Okay? And ability to be able to explain that to others, because that shows you really understood it. Okay? And you can explain it biblically to people in all sorts of different contexts, because you've got it. If you've really understood something, you can teach on it for 5 minutes or 5 hours. If you've really got it. So I can summarize the apostolic foundation in 5 minutes. I can summarize the overview of Scripture in 10, or I can spend a whole day seminar on it. Because you're learning biblically and how to explain it to others. Knowledge is to know why you believe what you believe. It's also, however, if you're doing it cross-culturally, it's no good answering the questions that your home base people ask. You have to answer the questions biblically that the culture's asking. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Okay, if I'm in a Muslim world context, I don't have to have big arguments about the sovereignty of God and our responsibility and God's sovereignty and how do they balance together and what's predestination and all the rest of it. I don't have to worry about that because they all believe God's sovereign. Their problem is fatalism, inshallah. You know, their problem is that learning to take responsibility. So I become a bit of an Arminian when I'm preaching in that context. If I'm preaching in another context, I'll be a Calvinist, you know? Because I don't think that way. I hold firmly to the sovereignty of God. I hold firmly to God's foreknowledge and choosing. But I also recognize that in some cultures, that's not the issue. So you make sure when you're teaching cross-culturally that you answer the questions they are asking, not the ones you wish they asked. Because you know the answers. And people get really confused about all that. And therefore, could I just say something about training in terms of systematic theology and biblical theology? Okay. When I started leading Catalyst, Andrew Wilson, some of you may know him, agreed to oversee our theological training course in Catalyst for leaders. So I said, okay, Andrew, ever so glad you're doing that. I want you to completely scrap it on on systematic theology and do it on biblical theology. Well, being Andrew, he'd written the syllabus in about 10 days. But basically I was saying, and so in our training now, they go right through the Bible, plus doing other leadership issues, of course, and draw the systematic theology from the biblical theology. Because that speaks to today's generation more easily. And also, now, do I despise systematic theology? No, I don't. I've absorbed books on systematic theology. Systematic theology is there to protect you from error. Biblical theology is to enable the Bible to become alive and draw your doctrines from it. Do you see? Systematic theology is important. The creeds are important. They're systematic theology. They're the riverbank of the Christian faith, where Scripture is, but also the creedal interpretations are to help us. But in today's world, I find going through the whole Bible and drawing all your teaching lessons from that probably more helpful. Now, that's my own personal heresy. Some of you may disagree. That's fine. Okay. So, and by the way, it's worked. Okay. And also, knowledge means to know how to apply what you believe. Otherwise, it's merely academic. I don't despise academic. Okay? I think we need people who are rigorous academically. But you've got to also learn how to apply what you've learned. Okay. Right. So that's knowledge. Will you allow me? Any questions on... Don't worry at all. I'm only teasing you. Any questions on that so far?
So have you got a kind of program to develop leaders? So while you're not doing systematic theology, biblical theology, but somehow you're able to cover the main things you want.
Oh yes. So all the biblical theology course that Catalyst run also does. So if an issue comes up in that book of the Bible, you deal with what might call the systematic doctrine from that.
Yeah. But in your training, do you cover everything in systematic or something?
Oh, I don't think you'll ever cover everything in systematic.
What are some of the main things you have for your discipling or training of leaders that you want them to have? from the systematic?
Gosh. Okay. I like questions. Thank you for reminding me. I want them to know the doctrine of God, doctrine of the Trinity, who Jesus is, the doctrine of the atonement, the doctrine of the church. But I get that from going through. They're just examples. Okay? So I believe I would cover everything, but just doing it in a way that makes people think the whole big story of the Bible, not just isolated doctrines. So the course we do that's the pastor's, leaders training course, which, by the way, is about 50-50 men and women. That's important. But also, it's the one we do for churches is just called God's Big Story, which does the same sort of thing, but in a way that suits people who haven't got the ability to go to a full leaders training course. Okay. And we're now getting that into lots of different languages. So that's knowledge. Character issues. What sort of things do you cover? Firstly, when I say firstly, this is not in order. They may come up in different order. Issues from their past that hinder their present. Okay, I don't believe in digging around in everybody's past. I don't think that's necessary. But where it's affecting their present relationships, their present attitude, maybe demonic bondages, it may be hurts that need healing, where that's affecting how they are now, that needs dealing with. Okay, for me, conflict over religious matters and my fear of man, that needed dealing with. Okay? Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be effective as a leader. If people have been badly abused and it's affecting their understanding of who they are in Christ, that needs to be worked through. But one of the things I've learned is that the circumstances that people go through have different effects. The same circumstances have different effects on different people. And so you just have to, if it's hindering their present, then you need to deal with that. And so you need to talk about them. Those are one of the issues you may do one-to-one rather than, all together. Next, their ability in relationships. How do they relate to people? They say that some leaders don't really like people, they love books. Well, I love both, okay? Because if you're going to grow in Christian leadership, how you relate to people, that means how you relate to authority over you, how you relate to peers, and how you relate to those you're serving, which needs to be with respect, with honor. Often, in some, not our stream, but in some streams that you'll get in many movements today, they say you must honor the pastor. Well, yeah, but the Bible says you honor those who in the world would have most dishonor. We're different. Do you understand? That's what it says, 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So how we treat people, you need to observe the people you're leading. How do they treat people? How do they treat their peers? And watch them serving and see how they teach, how they relate to those they serve. Is it with humility? Do they listen to people? What I've found is people that develop into overbearing leadership are often those who haven't learned to listen to people who they're leading. because they know what's right and they know what's what, and they don't listen. So ability in relationships, servant heart, and that always is there, you know. Jesus, when he got to the pinnacle of his ministry, really, knew he'd come from God and was going back to God, knowing that the Father had given everything in his hand. Therefore, he took off his outer clothes and washed his disciples' feet. You don't ever grow out of that in leadership. All sorts of models are important, you know. We've got quite a lot of folk from India in our church, and one of them had got another guest from India, and he was in our church car park with him, and he saw me drive in, and there was no room for me to park, so I had to go out and drive a long way away to park my car. And the guy who's a member of our church said to his friend from India, who came from a very different background, "That's how our leaders lead. They don't have a special place." Now, sometimes if I'm a visiting preacher somewhere, you know, and I don't know the area, it's nice to have them keep a space for you to park, you know. But it's attitude. I remember seeing a cartoon once in a Christian magazine. It was a car park, and it said, "Youth pastor, do not park here. Associate pastor, please park somewhere else. Senior pastor, don't even think about it." Okay? So we teach that. Their servant-heartedness, and give them tasks to demonstrate that. Ask them to do things which shows willingness to serve. Pardon? Test it, yeah. What are their patterns of temptation? Because we're all tempted, but as we're training people, we need to notice what's the pattern, what keeps getting them. Okay? And there's a need for accountability. You're asking about accountability. To be honest, I think when you're embarking on a training course, you need to say what level of accountability you're expecting. If it's simply a knowledge-based thing, that may be a bit different, but are you expecting you to be developed into some form of ministry? Another question, do they know themselves and their weaknesses? Some people are very ignorant about their own weaknesses. Some people are only too conscious of them and need to be set free from that. But it's important, you know. I think I know my weaknesses. I'm not going to tell you, but I think I know what my weaknesses are. And as you're developing people, you need to say, do they understand what their weaknesses are? And they need, because those need to be compensated for. By the way, that's what teamwork does. So I'm not just talking about sinful weaknesses, but even skill weaknesses and so on. How are they set free? What are the strongholds in their life? Okay, now, I've written a book on that, so I can't do much on it now because it would take me the whole rest of this conference. But what are their strongholds from past sin, where the devil can get in at them? What are their emotional strongholds? It can be rejection, it can be fear, self-rejection, passivity. and what are their cultural strongholds. And every culture has strongholds. I once did a series of strongholds seminars in the US, and I spent quite a lot of time on the stronghold of individualism. And someone came to me afterwards, very nicely, because they were agreeing what I said, they weren't resisting. They said, I've always thought that individualism was a virtue. No. We're part of a body. Pardon?
What we're talking about. It's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's for you to say.
Yeah, but you're right. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Okay? Because we are a body. A friend of mine has written a brilliant book called Misreading Scripture Through Individualistic Eyes.
Just got a question. What do you feel like the role of vulnerability as leaders is in this, as we raise others? Because you're talking about areas of life where we're identifying stuff, maybe weaknesses and things, but we all have them as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We lead.
Yeah.
Where do you see
Yes,
the role of
yes.
vulnerability?
I will, in a session where, when I'm with people and need to help them in that areas rather than in a public setting, then I would be honest about my own vulnerabilities. I don't preach about them all the time because you can sometimes get too introspective when you do that. How they handle pressure. Because some people find it a real struggle to handle pressure and intensity of problems. By the way, pastoral problems usually come in waves. It's rare you just get one. Okay? Life seems going quite well in the church for a while, and then suddenly you're beset by about 10 pastoral issues at once. That's how it is. Okay? And so, how you react when under pressure, and you help people through that. Do you get angry? Do you withdraw? Do you give up? Do you moan? How people relate to authority. Now, I don't believe in hierarchic leadership. I hope that's clear enough. But I still respect spiritual authority. And how do people react to that? Often people who've been damaged by authority find it hard to relate to godly authority. And you have to help them through that. So that the attitude to authority needs to be respect, not rebellion and not fear. Okay? Timekeeping, I know that's a cultural thing, but in an appropriate way to your culture, when you turn up. Work patterns, again, that can vary culture to culture, whether people are lazy or not. It all needs to be dealt with. Some cultures I've worked in, they seem to not be doing much. Then, when it really has to be done, they work so hard that they put us all to shame. Okay? Whereas my culture, you just steadily work. But not all cultures are like that. You just need to learn that. In Russia, where I go, they used to say, when it was the Soviet Union, they had a 5-year plan every time. And my friends in Russia used to laugh. They said, for 4.5 years, nothing happened. In the last 6 months, everything was achieved. That's our culture. Yes? I'm sorry, you have to speak up. Yeah. 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 Okay. 2 things. 2 or 3 things there, very important. Did you all get the question? Okay. In terms of developing leaders, what are you looking for in order to develop it? And how do you work that out into different cultures and make diversity not just a tokenism, yeah. Okay. Firstly, the signs that people show for leadership is a very cultural thing. And often it's very difficult to discern leadership cross-culturally if you just take the models from your own culture. So in Western culture, we're looking for people that take initiative, people that will say something, and people that just get on with it, people that have got good knowledge, yes. In many cultures, leadership is discerned by those who have respect of those around them. And it may be a permission-giving culture where they don't actually do anything until being asked to do so. And you must learn the difference. Sometimes we've been into places where we thought, this guy in this culture has really got it, he's a good preacher, blah, 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 blah. Then you find he's not respected by the people in the culture. You say, okay, we must listen to that. And you're looking for leadership amongst those who are respected. So I've quoted this before. Our brother from Ghana, who's now one of our elders, sat in the pews for about 5 years. I say this to my discredit. Then we asked him to do one or two things. And we thought, wow, this guy's a giant of the faith. But we'd missed it because he didn't push himself forward. You understand? Now, I mean, he's respected by all. Do you understand? So working cross-culturally in leadership, diversity not being a token, you have the same character and gift qualifications for leadership. You don't compromise those, but you look for it in appropriate ways in every culture. Do you understand what I mean there? Because often we're not looking for it when you're in a cross-cultural or in a multicultural context. Yeah.
So you spoke about the two types of people, like people who just work constantly.
People what, sorry?
You were talking about two types of like mindsets towards getting something done.
Yeah.
People who either work constantly or people who just get close to the due date and
Yeah.
get done. So I'm the second.
Yeah.
But there are people in my team that follow that would rather work throughout the year. And when, like, I often end up in situations where towards the due date, it's just me that has to finish it.
Okay.
So how would you?
Yeah. What you need to do is talk with the team and say, look, we're different personalities in this respect, different cultural backgrounds in this respect. How do we make it work between us? Because you don't want to be left with everything at the end, and they may be a bit frustrated with you on the way. So you need to talk that through. It's the same with another team. I'm not really teaching on team dynamics, but here goes. External processes and internal processes. Internal processes, you have a team meeting, you talk about something, they may ask a few questions or talk about it a little bit, but they need to go away and think about it because they're an internal processor. External processors think by talking, and they aren't quite sure what they believe until they finish their sentence. And it may even change their mind halfway through the sentence. When you've got both in a team, which you usually do, it can be very difficult, and the external processes can dominate proceedings and try and come to a decision before the internal processes have internally processed. And so usually if you've got a team of both, and most teams are, you often have to say, okay, we've had a debate, now we'll come back tomorrow, or come back next week, or come back next month, whatever's appropriate, and we'll talk about it again. And you don't get forced by the external processes into making a decision which is usually wrong. Because the internal processes need time to think it through. Okay. That seems to have struck home. But teams often don't learn that. So the internal processes get frustrated because decisions are made too quickly and they don't really agree, but they sort of go along with it. Or the external processes get, why do we have to wait till next week to make a decision on this? Isn't it obvious? No. Okay? You need the wisdom of one another, yeah?
So then as far as raising a leader where you've got the different timelines or the different processes,
Yeah.
are you considering how you would choose a leader out of those to manage those groups better? Like what, is that something you look for as your...
Yeah.
That's more of a coaching?
That's more of a coaching, because you don't usually know you're in the problem until you're in it. So that's more of a coaching issue, although it's helpful to make people aware of their personality. Because a lot of people don't think I'm an internal processor, they just think other people are bullying me into a decision. So you need to teach people, some are internal processors, and that's great. Yeah.
Yes. So, how does spiritual gifting come into play in leadership? Because a lot
Okay.
of people who are spiritually gifted but bad at leadership.
Yeah. Okay. The question was, how does gifting arise in this? Okay. I've not spent a lot of time talking about gifting because I'm presupposing that you're dealing with people who have some gift towards ministry. Okay? Now, that's everybody, actually, but some gifting towards leadership. Because I'm talking about training leaders. I'm not talking about general disciple making. General disciple making, a lot of these principles apply, but I'm focusing on the leadership. So people have got a call or you sense they've got the ability to lead. This is how you develop them. Do you see what I mean? Now, their gifting, it applies if they're an evangelist, it applies if they're a pastor, it applies if they're an administrator, because one very important principle here is that shepherding underlines every other gift. So if you have an administrator who's not got a shepherd heart, it doesn't work very well. Everyone just gets bureaucratically pushed into something. Okay? So you need to remember that as well. Gosh, what's the time? Sorry, Gosh. Sorry. No, don't apologize to me.
No. Mine is going to be contextualized on the African continent.
Yes.
You'd have a lot of guys who are very good theologians who go into the African continent and context
Yeah.
and want to raise leaders or help.
So people from outside the African context, yeah.
So maybe they've got a Western mind.
Western mindset, yeah.
Exactly. And they go into Africa and they want to raise leaders.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part is, which is something that I've experienced and heard from a number of people, they will say, we've put so much resources into Africa, but we don't see leaders rising up and coming through. And only to realize that they are actually missing certain things about the veneration of ancestors or syncretism or all of these issues,
Yeah.
which are very important in Africa.
Yes.
And then, of course, people like saying, I've just lost hope in working in Africa because it doesn't matter how much resources you pour into that. Leaders are not coming through.
Okay, let me say two things there. Firstly, African strongholds, which you describe, need to be part of the training process. But secondly, a Westerner often can't discern who is a real leader in an African context, and therefore needs help. He needs to have trusted African friends who will be honest with him and tell him when he's missing it. Do you see what I mean? Because we mustn't give up. And so I think two things are going on there. Strongholds like veneration of ancestors, but also misunderstanding what leadership is in an African context. Okay, then let me just, I won't get much of this. Okay, skills. Okay, teaching a skill. You show and explain why you've done it. You watch and oversee them doing it. You give feedback. I'm going fast now, okay? You give feedback on how they're doing. Don't just get some young person up to preach. Some man or woman say, just go and preach. No, you help prepare them for the preaching. In our church, someone else always oversees the sort of they make an exception for me. They don't look at my notes, but before they preach, and then feedback after they've preached. Then you can develop lots of preachers. So you give feedback. By the way, remember the 80-20 principle. 80% encouragement to 20% rebuke. Otherwise, you crush people. You delegate with accountability. You don't just delegate, that's abdication. You delegate with accountability. You give plenty of people opportunities. And you watch in terms of their people skills. Okay, that's in terms of skills. Sorry, I'm going fast because I've almost finished. No questions for a moment, all right? Training. Training is interactive. Trainers share themselves as well as their teaching. Learn to follow up. How did it go? What did you learn? How does that apply to your life? Jesus taught by asking and answering questions. Q&A, both ways, is an important way of training in skills. Training is relational. You spend time together. You don't just have a class. You spend time. You have fun together, and you work hard together. You review together. But as I say, don't always give don't always give the answers. Let them work it out from the principles. Also, when I take people traveling with me to other churches, especially if it's another culture, I say to them, oh gosh, I want to ban you saying this. In our church, this is what you do. Unless they ask, then you say, well, this is how we do it in ours. The reason is this particular principle. How does that principle apply in your context? But people often say, oh, well, this is what we do. So what? It may not be relevant. I learned that by getting it wrong. But I say to people, never say, this is how we do it, unless they ask and then explain the principle behind what you do as well as the outworking. Okay. Then, I wish I had much more time to do these three, but I haven't. The three things that catch leaders, you know them well: money, sex, and power. All the people that have fallen, all these big names that have fallen, it's usually one of those or sometimes a combination of them. Okay? So you help people with money. You talk about the pressure of debt, which brings temptation. You talk about faith. You teach people to have faith in God for themselves. You teach basic honesty. You have accountability. You keep the accounts well. In whatever culture, you do it in the culturally appropriate ways, but there's always accountability. When Paul was saying, I'm collecting money, he said, I don't handle it. I give it to Titus and these two other brothers.
Is there another catch in being powerless?
Sorry?
Is there another catch when you feel powerless?
Let me come back to that. Then sex. Avoid one-on-one counseling with a woman. Make sure you're not regularly ministering with a woman that's not your wife. By the way, this is not, I believe, that we want to raise women up in leadership. But how we do that as men will be different. There'll be women who can raise up other women. And when you're doing it together, men and women in the room, which you can do for most things, then you encourage both men and women into leadership. Okay? Give opportunities. If you're training preachers, if they're gifted, whatever, whether they're male or female, give them the same training to do it. Sorry, that's just what I believe, okay? Be accountable to others concerning temptations and problems in that area, particularly the temptation to indulge in pornography, which is now so prevalent. Watch out for flirtatious behavior and attitudes in people moving into leadership. Treat how to relate properly and appropriately to the opposite sex. Beware of emotional ties. Sometimes it's not a sexual relationship, it's an emotional relationship, but one in the end which binds two people together in an unbiblical way. Sorry I've gone through that quick. You all with me though? Yep. What's the time? 5:02. I'm sorry I've spent so long on this. All. Finally, power. Watch how somebody relates with their peers, first of all. Do they keep trying to dominate the conversation? Especially if they're an external processor. But actually, people want to dominate even in conversation with their peers and don't ask other people's opinions. That's early warning signs. Beware of the tendency, of the early stages of controlling, dominating, or manipulating in leadership. Controlling, dominating, or manipulating. If they start doing that, hold carefully the power that genuine anointing brings. I remember once, there was a massive move of the Holy Spirit many years ago in the 90s. That's church history for some of you. I was in one particular situation and I was ministering and praying with people and prophesying, And the power of God was just so there. And I suddenly got scared. I thought, I could do anything here. I could manipulate people. I could force people against their conscience. That was a genuine anointing. But I had to say, I will hold back, not on the anointing, but on some of the effects that could come. Watch it. Teamwork helps here. But have a team. By the way, there's two sorts of teams. People all talk about the team. Everyone believes in team nowadays. But in some places, you've got the boss and the team. And the team are the people that do what the boss says. Or there's a team where you bring your different gifts and work together under a leader in order to achieve purpose. We believe in the second, not in the first. Okay. And watch it. If there's a big charismatic personality, that they don't have a team, but not actually listen to the team. Okay. Right, loads more I could say. But I hope that's a helpful introduction to training leaders.